built on relationships, focused on people, and rooted in the community. Welcome to the Build Blue podcast. Tune in for weekly episodes featuring guests who are building a better tomorrow. You'll hear inspiring stories from industry leaders, business owners, community partners, and our team members. The Build Blue podcast, where construction comes to life. An Apex Construction Group production. Welcome to the Build Blue podcast. My name is Jess Blaze with Apex Construction Group, and we are joined remotely today by Miranda Basye with the Sioux Falls Metro Growth Alliance. Thank you for coming on the podcast, Miranda.
I am honored to be here. I'm really excited. Usually I host our podcast, so to be on the other end is really fun for me.
Oh, that is so cool. We'll have to give your podcast a listen, and we'll make sure at the end that you give us all the details on where we can find that podcast as well. We start all of our episodes with our Apex icebreakers. So we want to hear about your very first job. And a lot of people ask, like, my first job out of college, my first career. Nope, we want to go way back and hear about your very first job ever.
So truthfully, when you sent this and I, was kind of looking through it and thinking like, oh, okay, what are we going to talk about? And I saw that and I laughed audibly because I am the oldest daughter of two business owners. Both my parents own and operate multi-generational family businesses. And I'm like, I had my first job probably before I knew anything else. So my first job was anything from helping my mom sort through paperwork and posting like parking notices to running parts and wrenches for my dad. And it was, I think that's what you do when you're the child of blue collar business owners and operators is you get put in the trenches and you just do it. So I think maybe the official title could be like gopher or like utility. I don't know.
What do you think, and this I'm throwing in here, but do you think that experience helping your parents in their businesses is, or are skills that you've carried through now as an adult?
1000%. People kind of ask me about my background. I'm newer to the Sioux Metro Growth Alliance team in the nonprofit world. And so people will ask me kind of about my background. And one of the first things that I tell people is I grew up mowing commercial buffer zones and turning wrenches. And that's just the honest truth. And so one of the main things that experience, I have two younger sisters, so I'm the oldest child then of, young parents who are operating two businesses. Is you have to roll up your sleeves and you have to do the hard work, and even when it's not glamorous. And so that's something that in every role that I've ever had as an adult, then in adult work life, is you see things, I think, with a little bit different lens because you are willing to pull back the curtain or open the cupboard that maybe other people wouldn't, because you have this like diverse experience. And then you kind of got stuck with all of the nitty gritty, dirty jobs. And so you kind of see how those things work.
For sure. Let's start by learning a little bit more about you beyond your wrench turning background, which is so cool. I grew up in a family business too, so I feel like we have a lot in common, Miranda. But tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background and what brought you to the Sioux Growth Alliance.
Yeah, so I'm originally from the Sioux Falls area. My parents, like I said, own and operate some small business on the north side of town. My dad's a car guy, so for anybody who's maybe in the area, Barney's Used Cars and Parts or Barney's Auto Salvage, that's my family. But then also they own some rental property off of I-229 in Benson on the north side of town. So worked in Sioux Falls, if you will. We lived out in Renner, small town just north of Sioux Falls, but then I went to school in Brandon. So what was kind of cool about that, and it translates to the work that I'm doing now, but I got to grow up in a lot of different communities, if you will. And so it doesn't really work to just say I'm from Sioux Falls because my experience was a little bit different. But with that, I played a lot of sports growing up. Ultimately, I'd end up going to college and playing softball. I went to the University of Sioux Falls, played softball there. I was kind of a nerd. I was in the honors program. I was a double major. I was involved in our media outlet. I did a lot of things. And so one of the things that I tell young folks now, especially because I have younger sisters and then my husband has younger siblings, is college is everything that you put into it, not necessarily what's given to you. Um, but so I ended up staying in the area mostly because I met my husband while I was going to school. We didn't meet in college, but we met through mutual friends. And in my mind, I always thought I was going to leave the Sioux Falls area. When I was, growing up, when I was going to high school, I always just thought like, you know what, in order to be successful, in order to grow, in order to get opportunities, I had to leave in my mind, because in my mind, Sioux Falls was just this like small place that I grew up, right? Um, and just through, I think, especially in college, being involved with things even outside of sports, getting more involved with other things. And then I worked for an internet startup company right out of college, went to ad agency world. And just like throughout all of those different changes and different steps, the community of Sioux Falls just really showed up for me. And I was privileged with conversations and opportunities from folks that I just was like blown away about. I'm like, okay, well, I got to stay here now. So I guess at the end of the day, I'll just attribute that to my husband. So thank you, Tyler, if you ever listen, because I'm like now, present day with the Sioux Metro Growth Alliance, it's so fun to be able to say like, yeah, I was wrong. I thought I had to leave, but I'm wrong. And to be able to work for an organization that has a mission to give back to the communities that raised me and to the people that had such a formative role in who I am today and who I will continue to be as my career and my life grows.
Tell us a little bit more about the mission and function of the Sioux Falls Metro Growth Alliance, and kind of the mission, values, and what you guys do for your members.
Yeah. So I'm going to be fully transparent. I don't have our mission or memorized exactly as it's articulated. So this isn't verbatim. I just have to put that disclaimer out there. But in a nutshell, we support the economic advancement of the rural communities outside of Sioux Falls. So we serve communities that elect to be members in the 4-county radius. So that's Minnehaha, Lincoln, McCook, and Turner County, that we support those smaller communities. I like to say that growth is going to happen ready or not. And we support our communities to take control of that and to really decide what kind of community that they're going to be as our region continues to grow and evolve. And I think one of the things that, when maybe outsiders, if you will, people who maybe aren't from the area, Sioux Falls is at the center of a lot of that growth, and it's the biggest city in the state. And, we're positioned well with the interstates and all of that. There's a lot of life happening outside of the city center. So with the Sioux Metro Growth Alliance, we want to empower these more rural communities, these smaller towns where everybody in municipal leadership is probably working a different full-time job or running another business. And, we don't have the same full-time staffing, if you will, that maybe a city the size of Sioux Falls has. So we're trying to create opportunities for that education in terms of the nuts and bolts of economic development. What does it take to actually put an industrial park in your town? Or, what's the process to get maybe state and federal funding to help you with this housing development, and all those things that are very educated, very knowledgeable and talented economic development specialists on staff will have way more insight on than I do. But really, it's giving those communities a voice, educating them and helping them make the most out of the resources that they have, because our rural communities have a lot to offer. We're just not always equipped to maybe present that in the way needed to get a deal done.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Let's talk about the region. You mentioned the counties. Let's get in a little bit more in depth on some of those communities and maybe the potential that you see for growth in those communities.
Yeah, so right now we have 16 municipal members, and I'll just take a moment to explain what that means. Municipal governments elect or to be a member of our organization. So just because a community exists in our 4-county service area doesn't mean they're automatically a member. We're pro project, if you will. We want to support growth in the region as a whole, but what we can offer to members when they elect to be members is a little bit different, maybe a little bit more in depth. But I think our maybe southernmost direct communities are probably going to be Centerville, Worthing, Canton, out south of Sioux Falls. We reach out west to Salem. We're in Garrettson, Del Rapids, of course, over to Brandon, Valley Springs, and there's a whole bunch of others, sprinkled in there. We partner really closely with Harrisburg and Hartford and Lenox and and we partner with a lot of communities out in the area. And really what that means is that they're committed to growth and development for their communities. And so I think that maybe I'm just like getting really excited about what we're doing, and maybe I'm not addressing your question directly. So I'm going to stop talking and let you redirect me.
You're doing awesome. I would love to hear kind of, as you look at those cities that you're partnered with, what, and I'm asking this as a commercial general contractor, like, what do you think is the main need as far as commercial construction in those outlying areas? We had a chance at the Gold Shovel Classic a couple of weeks ago to meet a lot of those municipal leaders and have some great conversations. So I'd love to hear from your chair kind of what you see as the biggest need for commercial construction and within your partner areas.
That is a little bit of a hard question to answer from a generalist perspective because our communities range so much in terms of just the sheer population numbers to the quality of life or the type of life that there is. We might have more white collar communities that want different things than maybe some of our blue collar communities, if you will. So that in that sense, it's hard for me to answer on a really general level. But we've got small communities that are unbanked, that are looking for a committed financial partner to be in their community and to help them with that. We have communities that are looking for more shopping options. We've got communities that are looking for groceries, so they don't have to drive into Sioux Falls to have good grocery options. And I might be getting outside of I'm getting outside of commercial, but we talk about kind of mixed use stuff because housing is a really big topic. But then also one of the things that we find a lot in our communities because they are outside of the city center of Sioux Falls is quality of life things. A lot of our communities, people live there because of the pace of life or the charm that individual community has. It's maybe not the big city feel that you start to get in the middle of Sioux Falls. So that is at the forefront of a lot of those decisions or a lot of that planning. But one of the things that I've been really impressed with our community is the strategic planning or the desire for it. We see a lot of folks doing feasibility studies and looking to data to help drive those decisions. So maybe I danced around your point, but I think in all of our communities, they're growing, and housing is one side of things, but when it comes to the commercial space, I think it varies a little bit, but all of it comes back to people historically would maybe live there and then come do business in Sioux Falls. And so now you've got these communities that are all at different stages, and they're trying to figure out what is the next best way to get people to not just live here, but to work here and to play here. And I think sometimes, we've got to talk about which comes first. Is it play or is it work? And what does that look like?
Sure. So let's talk about housing a little bit within those communities. And I'm sure this is one of those where it varies as well. But are you seeing a demand for multifamily housing, single family housing, a mixture of both?
Yeah, I think it's a mixture of both. We have some communities that would really love to see some multifamily housing options. One of the challenges that we're running into is how does that pencil out for developers and for investors right now? I don't think I'm telling anybody anything that they don't know. When you look at, the how investors are investing their money, and the way that things are right now makes it hard, especially when you look at the market comparison of Sioux Falls. I think that our developers here, our investors here, are used to a certain timetable on when that investment's going to pay back, versus then a smaller community that might really have that need, but the timeline to full capacity or what have you might be a little bit different just based on the community. But we have a lot of communities that are talking about multifamily housing in some way, shape, or form. That maybe it's mixed use. There's a lot of conversations about downtown revitalization for a lot of communities. Some of them that have historic parts, but then also some of them that don't, right? And so are there ways to get creative that way? But one of the things, we work with Del Rapids quite a bit, and Denise Hanslick is I believe, a city councilor in Del Rapids, but she's also the executive director of the South Dakota Multi-Housing Association. And I'll put in a little plug because she is one of our panelists for our Growth Summit that's happening in September. We're talking all about housing in the region, and she's going to be one of our panelists. But her and I did a podcast a while back, and she talked a lot about how one of the things that she's trying to do, and she works across the state, is help people think outside the box when it comes to multi-family housing or multi-housing. And so that's where I think that you run into like the timelines of those projects. I think when you talk about single family housing, yes, there's a lot that goes into the design of that. But people, for all intents and purposes, know what that is. They know how it's going to affect the community. And I think that the conversation around that's a little bit different versus when you get to multifamily housing. I think that we take maybe a little bit more time to work through what does that look like in our community and what is the project and that kind of thing.
For sure. Coming at it from a lens of someone who grew up in the Sioux Falls area, let's just talk about the growth of Sioux Falls and the region as a whole.
Yeah. I've got family all across the upper Midwest. My aunt is up in Fargo Moorhead. She was a city councilor there for a long while, and her and I were actually just talking not that long ago. And the joke is always between her and my mom, oh, which one's bigger, Sioux Falls or Fargo, or, that kind of thing. I think that's what happens when they grow up on a small farm, and then you kind of like, get excited about that. But anyway, what's really fun for me growing up here, and growing up, I like to call it town hopping, if you will. I was going to auto auctions and tea. We were doing things in these small communities. We were going out to Hartford for the vet or for whatever else. And that's just the way that I grew up in life. And every time that you did that, like, to me, tea always felt forever away. Like, my mom had a hairdresser in tea when I was growing up, and I used to see her every once in a while. I'm like, man, gotta block off like a whole afternoon because I gotta drive all the way to tea. But the thing is, it's not even that far. At that point, Sioux Falls hadn't developed that far south, and so it felt like you were on the interstate, like for a while, because you saw some fields. But now everything is so interconnected and blended together. My husband and I live on the northeast side of Sioux Falls, and I grew up going to school in Brandon, and he now teaches in the Brandon Valley School District. And Madison and Veterans Parkway and that connection, that was never there when I was going to school. And so just to see how accessible everything is and the way that they're, redoing infrastructure, it really feels like one big space. And I think that's something that in economic development, as we are working with so many other communities and businesses, I think sometimes we just have to remind ourselves that residents don't often, I don't like generalizations, but many residents don't often think about, I'm going to go here because it's in such and such a town. I think we just kind of do life to our preferences. And to see Sioux Falls Metro kind of go that way is fun. Like I said, my husband and I still kind of make those random decisions. We're like, we still take our dog to the vet in Hartford, and we don't really think twice about if we're going to drive out to Harrisburg to eat versus in Sioux Falls.
Mm-hmm. It's been fun and interesting as Apex gets more integrated into the Sioux Falls market to talk to folks who have lived there for their whole lives or for a long time, about the growth. It's really exciting to learn more about it and to hear how quickly Sioux Falls Metro is growing, and then the outlying areas as a result of that as well. And I am probably putting you on the spot, Miranda, and I apologize. The regional population that you're dealing with as far as your members and just kind of outside of that Sioux Falls metro population, do you know the regional population?
Actually we just updated some of our collateral maybe like 2 months ago. And so we pulled some numbers there. And in our 4-county reach, not counting Sioux Falls, we support almost 80,000 residents. Give or take some, but it's roughly around 80,000. And so when you think of, I was actually just having this conversation with my dad. We were fishing yesterday, and he and I are kind of talking about this, because one, that he owns a business, and, he's talking about like, yeah, people will call us and they'll be like, hey, you say that you'll come pick up my car. They're buying cars from people off the street, what have you. And they're like, hey, you say in the Sioux Falls metro or the Sioux Falls area, does Lennox count? And my dad will be like, yeah, that counts. And I said, fun fact. And I'm telling him about the resident population, outside the city of Sioux Falls. And when you think about that, I don't think most people think about that. 80,000 people is a lot of people that aren't, they're contributing to our commerce, right? They're contributing to life in our area, and they're not reflected in the city of Sioux Falls' population. And so what's also cool then I think really inspiring, is to see the city of Sioux Falls working with these other, smaller municipalities, and the opportunity for collaboration that there is, because one of the projects that we're working on right now in terms of data is some commuter data. So if we're talking about 80,000 residents, what's the commuting data back and forth? Because we know that many of our residents in our rural communities are commuting into Sioux Falls to work. We also know that there are people living in Sioux Falls commuting out to the metro. I'll use Brandon as an example. We had the privilege of connecting with the folks over at Spartan. They build fire trucks. And then Lippert, they manufacture liver and truck parts, and they're in Brandon. And they talk about their workforce, and that's blue collar workforce, right? It's production work. And many of their employees aren't living in Brandon specifically. A few do, but that's not necessarily where they're drawing their workforce from. So that's something that I don't have the numbers for you on that, but that's something that we're aware of and we're kind of working through, because I think life is so much more interconnected than maybe sometimes we give credit to or truly understand.
From an economic development perspective, and this is just out of curiosity, you're using the term rural for the surrounding area. Is there a threshold where that becomes more of like suburban versus rural?
I'm probably not the best person to ask on that, truthfully. My training's not in traditional economic development, so there might be a few folks that are listening to me that are like, "Girl, you need to say it different." I think in a lot of ways, I use a term rural in part because we do have a lot of communities that are, outside. I look at maybe your core 4, if you will, T, Harrisburg, Brandon, Hartford. They're all, pretty close to, Sioux Falls, and they've got a little bit larger populations and more of our other communities. And so life there isn't necessarily rural. But I think sometimes when we get outside of our bubble of the Sioux Falls metro, and you go visit a larger city like Omaha, Minneapolis, even into Chicago, I think maybe sometimes that we forget that maybe our way of life is maybe a little bit more rural than other parts of the country. So I'm just justifying to you why I'm using my vocabulary.
No, that makes
I don't
perfect
want to be
sense.
wrong.
No, that makes perfect sense. And just thinking about the Mankato market, we say rural too. And a lot of our economy is ag based, and so that is a word that makes sense. I was just curious if there's like a cutoff or some sort of milestone where it becomes suburban versus rural. So that was just a curious question.
I'll just if any of our mayors let me know, because they will. Our the mayors that we work with are great. If any of them let me know that I need to tweak my vocabulary, I will. I'll keep you
Thank
posted
you.
on that so we can be on the same page.
You have a board made of community leaders. Are those mostly coming from the regions that you serve, or how does your board function as part of your organization?
We actually have two boards. So we have a unique board structure in that we have an executive board and then we have what we call a member advisory board. And so the executive board is maybe going to be a little bit more like I don't want to say investor focused, but like maybe business operation type things. These are going to be key stakeholders in organizations and companies that they want to see the metro grow. And we work really hard to make sure that the people that are helping us make strategic decisions for our organization are living and or working in the communities. And so, this year's board chair is Jay Buckles. He is a key accounts holder with Sioux Valley Electric, and they're based out in they've got office in Brandon and I want to say Coleman, but they service a lot of of the communities that we work with. But he, I believe, lives out in Harrisburg if I remember right. And so so we're really attentive to that. Because we are different than Sioux Falls. And so we want to make sure that the people that are helping us be strategic and plan for the future for our organization and for the future of what our organization is able to offer to our communities have that connection to life outside of Sioux Falls. But then in terms of our member advisory board, they help us determine our programming, and they really, for the lack of better phrasing, there may be our checks and balance. And they represent all of the municipalities that are members in our organization, all of the utility companies that support our organization, and then we also have, I believe it's either 5 or 6 at-large seats there. And so typically this is a recommendation or an invitation, if you will, to strategic partners that can help our organization continue to grow and evolve and educate us and our members. And again, here, when we look at those at-large seats, we're looking for those folks that are in the communities. We're not trying to, pick people out of businesses or investors in Sioux Falls specifically, but we really want to stay connected with the communities that we serve, especially because there's a lot of miles between some of them, right? So the more that we can be collaborative in that sense, I think that we can flesh our ideas out. So we have a lot of board meetings because we have 2 boards in our structure, but what's been really cool to see is the engagement with that and just those folks kind of batting around ideas, if you will, or just the cross collaboration and the refinement of ideas and solutions for problems.
Let's talk about your programming, your events. You are a nonprofit, so I'd love to dig into some more of what you offer.
Yeah. One of the things that I want to just say right off the bat is I think that we are in a year of growth, evolution, and refinement for our organization. So my role is new to the organization. They've never had somebody focused on specifically business relationships and then the event and marketing and communications. And so we're putting a renewed focus on what that means for our organization as a whole. So we've got a lot of things to figure out, right? Like we've got a lot of dreams, and that plays into trying to have a refined, 1 year, 3 year, 5 year vision and strategy, all those kind of operational planning things. So we're having a lot of those conversations with our executive board, and we've done some workshops and surveys and such with our member advisory board to help inform all of that. But going back to when we first existed as an organization, we were not the Sioux Metro Growth Alliance. We existed separately as the Lincoln County Economic Development Association, I believe that's right, and Minnehaha County, so Lakita Makita. And then they, after 20-some years, were merged to be Lakita Makita, which is fun to say, but doesn't really mean a whole lot, right? And so our current president and CEO, Jesse Fonker, kind of led the charge in that kind of merge and rebranding and truly making those organizations one, because as you notice, that only represented Lincoln and Minnehaha County. It didn't represent Turner or McCook, which butt up into this nice kind of quad county area we have. So that rebrand happened, I believe, towards the end of 2020, if I remember right. And so that kind of helped launch us into this new phase. So one of the things that was paramount in that new phase and what we offer today is what we call an enhanced member service to our municipal members. And so for some communities, it doesn't make sense for them to hire directly for an economic development specialist or economic development director. Either they don't have the funding, or they maybe don't know how to go about that. What kind of skills do they need, and how do you direct that person? Or maybe they just want to know that somebody else has got it. They don't want to train them. They don't want to have to, worry about those logistics behind it. So there's a whole host of different reasons why a community might be interested in that, but that's a service that we offer, and it's a direct staffing for those communities. And so we currently have 5 communities that take advantage of that. Del Rapids, Lenox, Worthing, and Salem all engage on that on a part-time basis. So Sheldon Jensen represents Del Rapids and Salem, each on a part-time basis, is a full-time Sioux Metro Growth Alliance employee. And then Ryan Solberg represents Lenox and Worthing. And then we have Lisa Zenz, who is full-time in Harrisburg. And so Harrisburg is the growing metropolis just to the south of Sioux Falls. And they got a lot going on, and their board just kind of came to the decision that, hey, we want more. And so that's been really cool for me to learn a little bit more about that and how those relationship dynamics work and what we're able to offer. But on the community side, we've just gotten really great reviews and feedbacks from those communities that we're supporting, because they know that the person who is then working to create growth, get deals done, drive action in their communities, that person is plugged in to regional relationships and regional education and regional projects. And they're at the table at a lot of different conversations. And so if that doesn't organically bring new and more projects to the community, it gives that person, if it's not going to end up in a project, it gives that person more angles, right, to work those developments or to think outside the box and help drive the change in a community. But beyond that, all of our members have access to our board meetings. They have access to, we do mayors monthly roundtables. So it's all the mayors of the communities that we represent. We do an economic developers monthly roundtable where we're bringing in speakers and we're helping drive education. Sometimes we talk about things like policy platforms. Childcare is a really big conversation right now. Those things happen kind of like clockwork. They run, they do their thing. But then on top of that, we are working on developing a economic development rural leadership based program. And so we want to bring some of that polish, some of those negotiation skills to our economic development leaders in communities. And we also want to teach them more about economic development, more about the ins and outs of wastewater or city planning or, all those things that aren't super sexy that are important, right? And coming from commercial construction, I'm sure you can think about all of these like necessary evils that aren't super fun, but they matter.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that we are exploring right now and what that could potentially look like. So it's not a promise that'll be in our programming, but we're really interested in that. We host a few different events. We try not to be super event heavy. A lot of good things can come from events, but I also think they can be distractions, right, from the like tangible work that really is economic development. So we host an annual meeting every year, and that's where we want to get all of our folks, all of our investors, all of our members together, and we want to talk about our challenges, our successes, and our vision forward, and that's usually in March every year. We host our Gold Shovel Classic, which you guys, were just at. And that is in a lot of ways a thank you to our members and to our investors, and in a way for people to spend an extended amount of time together to kind of get to know each other, and hopefully create relationships that last beyond the golf tournament. And then we also host what used to be the Grow Smarter Conference, and we this year is, I believe, the third year that we're doing it, and we've made a few changes, and so we've kind of revamped it. We're calling it the Growth Summit instead, and we've changed the structure of it. So originally, this was a 3-day event that we kind of piggybacked off of the Governor's Office of Economic Development, their annual conference in April. And so you got to have like 4 days full of just all things economic development. And that sounds cool if you're like a super economic development nerd, right? But that's a lot to ask of people who are busy and there's a lot to ask of people, right? So we also just found that we were trying to just cover a ton over those 3 days, and we didn't really feel like it was making the immediate impact that we really wanted it to do. If we're going to host an event, we really want our members especially, but the people attending, to be able to walk away with something that's going to spark action. There's a lot of feel-good stuff out there, but at the end of the day, economic development, it's projects, right? It's jobs, it's businesses coming to town, it's homes, it's those tangible things. So we, in September 20th and 21st, will be hosting the 3rd annual Growth Summit at the Holiday Inn Express in Brandon. It'll be an evening workshop on the 20th and then a full day event on the 21st. And we will rotate topics each and every year. So it'll be a different focus. And this year we're talking about housing. And so that's probably our big event, our biggest event of the year. We're in the thick of finalizing some speaking, finalizing some sponsor spots, and really ramping up the planning on that. We have dreams and aspirations of hosting an event that we're tentatively calling the Chairman's Clay Classic, being in South Dakota. We like hunting, we like guns. I grew up doing that, so I'm like really excited about the idea of being able to host something like this. So we just want to get more people out to communities doing things. But yeah, I think that's maybe just the overarching things that we do. We are, with my role and with kind of the year of evolution, if you will, we're also trying to get creative about how we engage with our private partners. So one of the things that historically our organization hasn't put a strong emphasis on is, what does it look like for us to engage with and support private businesses in return for their support for our work and our organization. And so myself, our president, CEO, Jesse Fonkert, and our executive board, we're working through what does that look like in terms of some sort of programming, some sort of membership model potentially for private investors, for us to be able to continue enhancing our tangible programming efforts for our communities. And then, I mean, last but not least, we work deals. So that's not really my realm. But we make connections. Our folks know what's going on. They're always having conversations with whether a business, an investor. We partner really closely with the Governor's Office of Economic Development, and the Adam Molseed and his team over there. They're great folks, and so we work a lot with them. And really across the state, we try to engage with those other economic development organizations, because it's not always necessarily about the region. Sometimes it's about the state too. And so we're South Dakota proud here, and we want to help work through all things that are good for the state. So that feels like a lot, but also not enough at the same time. So I'll pause for interjection.
Yeah, I love your enthusiasm for all of those programs. Can you give us some ways that people can engage with what you're doing, whether it be social media, website, your podcast? And I can leave links in the show notes for all of these things. But it's so much, and it's such a big region. You're serving so many community members. So I'd love to be able to share your information out.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I think the easiest place to find all of our connection points is going to be our website. So that's Sioux Metro, SIOUX Metro there's an opportunity to sign up for email updates. We've got a button right on the main header. We send out a weekly email every Tuesday. So if you sign up like right now, every Tuesday, we send out we call it the Sioux Metro Minute. It's kind of just a roundup of some of the headlines happening in the communities. They're not always our stories, but they're communities around us that, things are happening. We also do a monthly Sioux Metro Sites email. And so this is just kind of, I think usually it's like 8 to 10 properties that are for sale or lease around in the region. Folks that are either looking to make an investment or move their business or what have you. So we send out those emails. We're pretty active on our email list. You also will have the option when you fill out that form to sign up for event notifications. Many of our events, not all of them, but many of our events are open to the public if you choose to buy a ticket. So the Growth Summit, that's open to the public. Anybody can buy a ticket. I'm actually working on contracting a speaker out of Montana. So we're really excited about that. And then we have a Strong Town speaker out of Minneapolis. Daniel Harrigus with Strong Towns is coming from Minneapolis. So there's that Minnesota connection there. We're on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, most notably LinkedIn, and we post our podcast to all of those. You can find the Growing Places podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, where have you.
Wonderful. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Miranda, before we wrap up?
I think the last thing that I would just like to add is to thank you, Jess, and your team with Apex. And it's been fun to connect with you guys and get to know you guys a little bit, and Dylan in the area and his enthusiasm for Harrisburg, where our golf tournament was. But just to have partners like yourselves that desire the collaboration and communication for growth and development, even outside your state, right? And just to think bigger, that is so fun, because when we take away this idea of, competitorness or that, just like that, when we take away the scarcity mindset, I think is what I'm trying to say, and we can just zoom out and think big picture, greater good. At the end of the day, we all just want to enjoy our lives and we want to love where we live. And so to have partners like you guys and, to connect with folks like you guys is a lot of fun for us. And that makes us really excitable about dreaming bigger. So thank you guys for your partnership, for your enthusiasm, and just for the work that you do.
Well, thank you for saying that. It's been so exciting to get more involved in the region and meet your team and you. And we had a blast at the golf tournament, and we're just really excited about the future. So thank you again for coming on the podcast. You can catch the Build Blue podcast everywhere you get your podcast: Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and we look forward to catching up with you again. Hopefully attending some more events and just seeing the growth that is happening in South Dakota. So thank you so much, Miranda.
Thank you.